Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Before we get to the substance of what we're talking about today, let me just say that our approach to the Mexican judicial reform is consistent with what we have been doing in Mexico over a number of months about changes in laws and what it might do to the institutionalization of certain structures in Mexico. And it's also consistent with the way that we ran our five-part series on the Chilean constitutional process, where we tried to keep it in Chile, but also bring the discussion from experts outside of Chile to do a comparative analysis of various aspects that were going on in both of the proposed constitutions in Chile. And we're doing this event in a similar fashion, and we're pleased to count on an all-star panel to help us navigate the issues. There are many issues in this reform, as many of you listening to this will know. We will try and focus on what we think are some of the most important ones, or certainly the ones that have seemed to be the most controversial, and see if we can't get some understanding of what they're all about in a domestic and in a comparative analysis. A couple of housekeeping, or several housekeeping things. This is obviously on the record. It's a public event. A video of this event will be posted on our website by later today or tomorrow at the latest at ccacanada.com, where you can see all our other events, including the ones we did on the Chilean process and the ones we've done on Mexico. And finally, we will take questions, but they will be written. Please use the question box below, and please try and make it in the form of a question, short, something that would have a question mark at the end of it, so it sounds more like a question than a diatribe or a long commentary. Thank you very much. And so now let's get going. As I say, we have a lot to cover. Let me welcome the panel. We have Richard Albert, who's professor and director of constitutional studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome, Richard. Nice to have you. And Richard is also Canadian, which is wonderful. Alejandro Garro, who is a senior research scholar, faculty of law at Columbia University, amongst his many appointments through his long and illustrious career in the Americas and in Europe. Julie Diane Recinos is a professor, University for Peace, and the former advisor to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Mexico. Welcome, Julie. Andrea Pozas-Loyo is professor of Institute of Legal Research at UNAM in Mexico City, distinguished research fellow at the University of Texas at Austin as well. Sofía Ramírez Aguilar is executive director of México, cómo vamos. Welcome, Sofía. And that is our illustrious panel for today. Let's get going. The first thing, I think, before we start to get into the provisions, is if we could ask Julie to tell us briefly, what is the status of the reform package now, and what's her view of the prospectus going forward in the next little while? Julie, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ken. Hi to everyone out there. Glad to be here. As you may all know, for a constitutional amendment to pass in Mexico, it is necessary that there is a qualified majority, a 2/3 qualified majority in both chambers of Congress. And after that, if it passes, then the proposed amendment must be approved by a simple majority of state legislatures, so at least 17 of the 32 states. The Judicial Reform Initiative has been approved by the Chamber of Deputies. The vote was 359 votes in favor, 135 opposed, with 0 abstentions. And the initiative that was Tuesday night, early morning hours of Wednesday. And the initiative is now heading to the Senate for discussion and approval. Senate committees plan to begin discussions on September 8th. So that is the current status. Apparently, news reports say that there are seeking to get one more vote for the qualified majority in the Senate.
Thank you very much. Andrea or Sofía, did you want any other comment on that, or what you think will happen over the next several weeks on this process? No, nothing. Okay. Sofía, any thought you might have? You're on mute, Sofía.
Not anymore. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I perceive there is a lot of unrestness among several economic actors within the country, specifically, of course, also international actors as well. But I have the feeling that people are realizing this is real now. I don't think a lot of the rules of engagement will change in terms of economic interaction in the short term, but I do believe that in the medium term, a lot of investments won't be announcing themselves as a fact until they see how the new, judiciary branch starts to function, because within the rules, they are trying to pass the bill in which half of the federal judiciary is going to be changing as soon as in 2025. So I believe this is going to be a major topic within the revision of the USMCA or the CUSMA, of course. And one of the biggest challenges will be to have a new government coming that will be part of the revision, that has a Secretary of Commerce, Marcelo Ebrard, who actually asked for being what's the word, dispensado, that he's going to be not longer a senator as soon as yesterday, like he was an elected senator, but he will be the one who will be leading the conversations with Canada and the US for the coming years. And therefore, he excused himself from being a senator. And the person who's going to jump in is one of the actors that will need to be watching for the coming weeks. And I think the next week will be very important in terms of what's coming next, whether the reform is going to be flowing as it is or not. I believe it is highly probable that it is going to be flowing as it is.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. So, Julie, and we're going to come back to some of those themes, Sophia, that you just raised a little bit later. Thank you. Julie, do you want to start off to tell us briefly what was the overall justification of the government for coming up with these packages? In other words, what were the perceived problems in the Constitution and the judiciary, and why these? Well, we'll talk about the specific solutions clause by clause, but what was the overall view as to why they thought it was necessary to do this?
Okay, so to understand the proposal for judicial reform, you have to go back in time, at least to 2018, when President Andrés Manuel López Obrador comes into power, under the stated mission of transforming the Mexican systems, Mexican society, Mexican state, in order to serve the interests of the most marginalized and poorest sectors of society. Back in 2018, he called out the judiciary as elitist, as serving moneyed interests, as a source of nepotism, of corruption, and said that reform was needed. So that's one thing that we need to see, that this comes from the very beginning of his presidency. Second, it's important to note that while the judicial career path purports to be a meritocracy, and it does have its merits, primarily that those within it become highly specialized over time. However, it's not truly a meritocracy, because key positions are often obtained through influence peddling, through the distribution of exam answers, including the sale of exam answers. These are documented cases where this has happened. The exams themselves are outdated, often based on rote memorization, and biased, particularly at the oral stage, where magically, for instance, women's scores seem to plummet. What the result of this purportedly merit-based system is a federal judiciary that actually represents a tiny fraction of Mexican society, systematically excluding women and minorities. At the local level, less than a third of states have merit-based evaluation systems, and their governors and political parties have a strong influence in who gets to the judiciary. Third is that the Council of the Federal Judiciary has been very ineffective in disciplining judges. A study just came out where it shows that over the totality of its existence, very, very, very few judges have been sanctioned, even though there are several complaints due to illicit enrichment, money laundering, tax fraud, abuse of authority, sexual harassment, and crimes against the administration of justice. There are very few sanctions against judges. Recognizing the need for profound change, in 2021, Chief Justice Arturo Saldívar proposed a comprehensive reform aimed at eradicating nepotism, trying to dismantle networks of influence between law firms and judges that had arisen, things like that, with the support of the other branches of government and state legislatures. However, unfortunately, as of 2022, the current administration has undertaken to undo all of those reforms and seems to have positioned itself not as a check and balance to the other branches of government, but rather as opposition. And this sort of the evidence for this is in improper meddling in election processes and in certain rulings that have been seen by a large sector of the populace as having been based not on technical or judicial considerations, but rather on political considerations. And we have to then realize that President Andres Manuel put the reform on the ballot. He said to the Mexican populace, I need a supermajority in order to transform the judiciary. And the Mexican populace responded with a resounding yes. So now there is a mandate. And the truth is that Mexicans currently do not trust the judicial system. There is a survey by the INEGI, a national survey, stating that over 57% of the Mexican populace has little to no confidence in the judiciary. For the common person, the Mexican legal system has been opaque, difficult to navigate, slow, with many people waiting for over 10 years to be sentenced, rife with impunity, with mothers literally digging, trying to find their missing loved ones for decades. Some defendants are victims of torture, etc. Yet when moneyed interests are concerned, it seems that justice comes swiftly. So we can understand the reform as an attempt to wipe the slate clean and construct a judiciary from the ground up that better represents Mexican society and the interests of the Mexican population. I think we can in context terms, those are the primary justifications for why this is needed.
Great, thank you, Jude. That was a great oversight. So I was making some notes as you went along. It seems to me that the ills that the government believes are a riddle. That the system it's slow to deliver justice. There's an exclusion particularly of women on the judiciary. There's impunity and a lack of oversight or on judges for bad behavior. We'll call it bad behavior. I know that's a euphemism many times for much worse than bad behavior. Yeah, and then meddling in the whole judicial selection process has been riddled with defects as well. That's a fair summary of what you said, more or less. Is that right? Okay,
Yes,
great.
thank you, Ken.
Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, so Andrea, do you want to talk a little bit on the overview, or should we get right to some of the clauses? What would you prefer to do on this?
Maybe
Julie's
I
oversight.
can engage a little bit with this overview so that we have
Sure.
So very briefly, because I know you want all to get to the specifics. I think something that is important here to note is the first point will be to what extent I don't agree with several of the things that have been said, but I think that we can separate one, to what extent these what is the knowledge academia has on the points that have been said, and second, even if we assume or we agree with certain of the points, is this reform the way to improve that, or are we going to end up in a worse position, even with regard to these problems? So the first problem is regarding women. There is a lot of research on this. I have done quite a bit, and it's true that women in the judiciary historically were very excluded. But if you see the tendency, actually the numbers, the number of women have increased largely, and in the last few years, as I'm sure Julie knows. Regarding the impunity is huge in Mexico. I mean, it's one of the greatest problems, but unfortunately, this reform wouldn't address this problem. What is the problem? What is the main problem of impunity in Mexico? If you see for instance, what Julie noted, that the large numbers of people that we have a lot of people that have disappeared. The problem in general is very well located, and this is a large agreement in academia, not in the judiciary, and not in particular in the judiciary, but in the prosecutor, mainly in the prosecutor cases base. Why? Because more than 90% of the crimes are not there is no the demand presented, and most of them die in the prosecutor phase. So the problem of impunity is not located in the judiciary, and particularly not in the federal judiciary, and the reform doesn't address the core of the impunity problem. And last but not least, the nepotism and corruption case. There is again a lot of research on that. Actually, the problem was raised by one of an academic, Julio Ríos Figueroa, who published an article on this. But again, most of the nepotism it has been shown to be located in not the career, not the judges, but on the many other offices that are involved there. Well, I could go on, but I think my main point and the summary will be, yes, I mean, I would nuance some of the claims, because I think they were too general and not located. And second, the main problem is it is not clear that this reform addresses these problems, even if we agree with some of them.
Okay, great, Andrea. Well, let's get into this now. Yeah, Julie, I see your hand up, and I wanted to ask you a question, and maybe this is want to answer, because I want to get into the first issue, is the selection of judges, right? And then we can bring everybody into this conversation. Certainly, Richard and Alejandro, who haven't spoken yet. But I guess the first question, Julie, you would agree or not that a big part of the problem is in the prosecution, in the prosecutor's office of the judicial system? Just that's a short. Would you agree that that's also an issue?
I do agree with that, and I think that the reform needs to continue. We can't just look at the judiciary. We have to look at all aspects of the legal system, and definitely including prosecutors. I would completely agree with that. But also, I would like to mention that this reform is not just for the federal judiciary. It mandates that the local judiciaries adapt themselves to the systems of the federal judiciary. So that was, I guess, part of my answer to what Andrea was saying. But also to mention that the biggest jump in women in the judiciary was during Chief Justice Saldivar's administration, due to affirmative action policies that were implemented, including exclusive competitions for women, and policies for the geographical assignment of persons that gave preference to persons who were in charge of families. Because we noted that were certain, as part of the administration, that were true barriers to women signing up for the competitions. During the 4 years of Chief Justice Saldivar's administration, the percentage of district court judges jumped from 23 to 40% in 4 years. And the highest number of women judges, circuit and district court judges, were named since 1995, since the judicial career was implemented. During the past administration, the rate of women being represented in the judiciary has actually decreased because a lot of these affirmative action policies were reversed. And in terms of, is this the best reform possible? Probably not. I'm sure there's a lot of things that could be improved upon, but this reform was actually set out in February. And the judiciary said that it was going to bring its own counter proposal. That counter proposal never materialized. And it is important to note that both before and after the elections, there were dialogues in which civil society experts such as Andrea were invited to come and give their views on how the reforms could be improved. I think here it's also important to note that the special rapporteur on the independence of judges sent a letter, a missive, in stating all of her concerns with this reform. And practically all of the concerns raised by the special rapporteur led to change, well, maybe not directly, but were addressed somehow by the committee within the Chamber of Deputies, the Constitutional Issues Commission, that made changes to the initial proposal by Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The special rapporteur worried that judges should be selected on the basis of their suitability. Well, there's an evaluation committee foreseen in each of the 3 powers, which will be submitting candidates. She mentioned the participation of civil society. This is also addressed. Public debates will be organized by the National Electoral Institute.
Okay, so Julie, I want
mhm.
to come to that one on a
Okay.
case by case or point by point thing. Thank you for all that. You definitely will
Okay.
have plenty to say more about that, and you will have time. I know before I want to get to the election of judges point, but before we do that, Sophia, I understand that you had a quick comment to this point or these points.
Yeah, very quick comment. I believe I agree with Julie that there are many other options how to do this best. I believe a counter proposal of the judiciary would be also a good idea. But I also believe that you cannot make such a big amendment to the Constitution without having an active discussion, such as being included in a broader aspect, in a broader join of many other positions regarding how to do a better solution. I believe having a big majority isn't a solution at all. It's just being authoritarian in terms of we don't care what other minorities say. And I believe democracy is pretty much the embedded in guarding the rights of everybody, not only having the super majority, which is what we are saying now. I agree that this is an important issue, not only for the investments, but also for the people. And I am very aware that impunity is like 97% for the regular cases of felonies, but this particular reform is not addressing that issue. And of course, we have the lack of quality of justice at the local level. But I am not sure that by doing this kind of supermajority decision without having the proper discussions at the local level and with so many other positions, we are going to be in a better place of. So I want to stop there because I believe we have some bigger part of the discussion coming, but I really would like to intervene in pretty much every aspect because I believe I have also something to say within any other moment of the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sophia. Okay, Richard and Alejandro, you have been very, very patient. Thank you so much. Let's move into now the issue of election of judges. And you've listened to what the opinions have been about the background, what the government perceived to be the background of the problems, and also what Andrea and Sofia believe are the real problems and whether or not these problems are being addressed in the reform in an overall general kind of a way. And Andrea, we'll definitely bring you back into this, and Julie as well. But let me ask Richard this. Richard, one of the justifications initially, and I think it's still being heard by the government on the election of judges, is that, well, in a number of states at the state level, not at the federal level, that in the United States, there is election for judges. Do you want to talk a little bit, first of all, any introductory comments you want to make about what you've heard, but then also if you could focus a bit on what you think or what has been shown to be the experience in the United States in jurisdictions where judges have been elected as opposed to some other nominating process.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ken, for convening this program. It's really, I think, a rich and important discussion. It affects not just Mexico, not just the Americas. These are questions that reverberate across the entire world. We see similar challenges being faced and confronted in Europe, in Africa, in Asia. And so thank you for convening this discussion. Those of you who have been listening to the conversation so far, you've heard some really technical aspects of the proposal, but also some grand, lofty ideals. We've heard the terms democracy being mentioned, not yet the rule of law, but that should be mentioned as well, and constitutionalism. We may each have our own views about what these terms entail and indeed demand, but I think it's important to stress, from my perspective, as someone who studies constitutions around the world, that there is no single answer to what democracy demands universally. These are themes, principles that have to be defined locally. And so what I'm really interested in seeing so far in Mexico and in the days and weeks and months ahead is how the people and their elected representatives choose to define democracy. It could well mean democracy is the will of the people, chosen through elections by majority vote. One could also say, however, that democracy requires something else: protection of minority rights, regard for the values of the rule of law and constitutionalism. And so there may be some tensions here that we will see in play in Mexico in the days ahead. On your question, Ken, about elections in the United States, I have to say, as I was listening to Julie's really excellent overview of the proposals underway now, probably on the way to enactment not too long from now, as I was listening to Julie quite carefully, I heard echoes of the drivers of change in the US long ago, when the choice was made at the state level to choose judges by election. Corruption was a big impetus for electing judges at the state level years ago, as was an effort to infuse the will of the people. There's a value, it was thought, and still today many believe, a value in giving the people a say in choosing who will govern them. And given that courts do a lot of governing, people thought and still believe today, many do, that it's important to give the people a point of entry into choosing who will represent them. And then the third theme that resonated years ago when the choice was made to hold elections for judges at the state level was that it was important to have the views of the present generation reflected in who would govern them. You know, it's one thing to appoint a judge to the bench, and if she's there for 40, 50 years, you know, her views may not change, right? But if you have frequent, regular elections to repopulate the courts every 8 years, every 10 years, every 12 years, whatever the term is, then there's a increasingly frequent regularity of likely turnover of who's sitting on the bench, which will reflect the current, present, modern day values. And so you've asked, Ken, I'm going to pause in about 15 seconds. You've asked, well,
No, keep going.
You've asked, Ken, well, how has it gone at the state level in the US? And here, I'll just lay out two questions. I'd love to hear from the other experts here, how you respond to these 2 points. How has it gone? Two concerns have presented themselves in the United States at the state level where judges are elected. And by the way, it's not every state that elects its judges, and they don't all elect them the same way. So for example, there are nonpartisan elections and there are partisan elections at the state level, which leads me to the first of two themes I wanted to raise. Partisanship. Will judges in Mexico be affiliated with one or another political party? My understanding is no, is that there'll be nonpartisan elections. But will that mean that candidates for office have to bite their tongue and not endorse one or another candidate who's running for office in their local jurisdiction or beyond in the nation more broadly? First question. Second question that relates to how things have gone in the United States has not to do with partisanship, but with campaign finance. So this is a concern that has really been quite prominent here in the United States, is that when judges go to the polls, the ones that win are the ones that are backed by the most campaign contributions. So what is the state of that in the reform that's proposed in Mexico? Will candidates be able to raise money? Will corporations, independent individuals be able to run ads on TV, in print, on radio on their behalf? So these are two things that I think are quite prevalent in the ether here in the United States when we think of judicial elections at the state level.
Thank you very much, Richard. Wait, no, Julie, I really will come back to you, but we definitely want to all listen to what Alejandro has to say on this, and then we'll come back, and I'm sure Andrea has things as well as Sofía to this point, because this election of judges is really the point that we could spend a full day talking about that, and maybe we'll end up spending a lot of this time talking about it. That seems the one that really is receiving a lot of heat and a lot of attention. Alejandro, your expertise is systems throughout the hemisphere, of course, beyond as well. I invite you in now, please.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you very much for your invitation. And I definitely enjoy the presentations and overview that my colleagues that preceded me have given, especially the perspective, the comparative perspective that puts Mexico within a certain frame of challenges that are, as Richard just pointed out, being faced by almost every jurisdiction in the world, including, of course, the United States, or now even in Spain, where I'm teaching this semester. We're having the same situation where, obviously, the dissatisfaction and mistrust on the judiciary because of its slow pace, because of its multiple problems, are definitely part of the very big issue that Richard put it in terms of democratization or rule of law issues, which are closely linked to the question of the judicial independence. And I want to point out one thing from the overview that Julie gave us. I think that the issues, that infirmities of the judiciary, of the administration of justice that she pointed out, seems to me so common to many other jurisdictions, especially obviously in Latin America. And I mean impunity, corruption, obsolescence of the legal system, slow pace of this, and many other issues. But there is one point that I would like to emphasize that is extremely important in every country which is in a transition towards a more consolidated democracy, which is the case, obviously, of Mexico, and that is independence. Independence from whom? Well, definitely from the other branches of government is a very important issue. And on this point, I think it should be emphasized that other than the questions of corruption, impunity, or inefficiencies in the judiciary, which are faced, obviously, Mexico faces its own issues of independence from the other branches, especially from the executive branch, which is obviously the more powerful branch, especially when you have a government supported by an overwhelming majority of the people, like is the case of Mexico. So I think in this point, I find interesting when President Andrés Manuel comes up with this initiative in 2018, I would like to go back to 1994, because in 1994, when the reforms of the judiciary in Mexico were introduced by President Cedillo, there really were very strong efforts to strengthen the judiciary and to make it independent from the executive branch. In fact, the scope of jurisdiction of the Federal Supreme Court of Mexico, which is similar to the constitutional courts in Europe, which goes beyond the controversies, limitation that the US model establishes, has been used by the Supreme Court of Mexico with great courage in the past. But it's noticeable that when that Supreme Court was co-opted by a Chief Justice who was close to the president, then there was one part of the story. But then when the Chief Justice was changed to another Chief Justice, which actually did not hesitate to really curtail and limit the powers of the executive branch, then in that case, another reform came up in 2023. And then I think the issue should be seen in this context. So the question of a particular issue of the selection of judges, which is at the very core of these reforms, is something that I have already seen in a country close to me, which is my native country, Argentina. There was a project many years ago, 2013, by President Kirchner, who at the time had a very overwhelming support to democratize the judiciary. And she also proposed the direct election of the members of the judiciary, of the Supreme Court, and also members of the Council of the Judiciary, which is another very important institution in Mexico, which we have not mentioned, but it's very much closely connected with the judiciary in general, the function of this Council of the Judiciary. Now, fortunately, in my point of view, that reform of democratization was held unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of Argentina. Otherwise, we would have had again one system where one popular president was to have the justices appointed directly by the people. Comparatively speaking, within the region, because of course comparisons, we can also say in Switzerland, some cantons also elect popularly the judiciary, not the members of the Supreme Federal Tribunal of Switzerland, but yes, from a few cantons there. But again, each country has its own history, its own culture, and its own civic strength. So I think we need to compare something which is more along the same lines. And within Latin America, the only example we have is Bolivia, where there had been a try in the Constitution of 2009 to make the justices of the highest court, the Corte Plurinacional de Bolivia, the highest constitutional court, I would say, selected by direct vote. Well, the experience in elections in 2011 and 2017, for now I can report, based on impartial reports, has not been very positive either. So they actually have been discouraged to continue with this system. In Argentina, as I said, it failed. The question would be, in Mexico, what should we expect to happen if the members of the federal judiciary were to be appointed for a time of years, which happens to coincide with the 6-year terms of the president? That's definitely has a very strong blow on the system, on the traditional system of what we know by judicial independence. And I'm very pleased to know the chambers of commerce in Mexico, in the United States, in Canada, are really reacting to that. And the fact that the potential investors and commercial people are concerned about the judicial independence makes me think that it shows a sign of maturity that realizes how relevant it is for the future of the country. And that I will stop here because I know that we have many other points in the agenda other than the selection of judges.
Thanks, Alejandro. Andrea, I'm going to come to you right after this, but Alejandro, if I could just do a follow-up question. You mentioned Bolivia, and you said that the experience of having elected judges at the Supreme Court has not been positive. What have been why do you say that? What have the not positive experiences been?
The non-positive experience has been one which is not strangely to be expected, that definitely those potential candidates for the position of justices in the highest court of Bolivia, by every means, had to promote themselves as potential candidates. So other than the question of who financed those TV ads and that sort of activity, it was clearly the situation to be judged by the judgments rendered by that highest court in Bolivia, that it was very difficult for those candidates whose election to the office was supported by several donors. At the time they had to decide many issues that came before the court, they found it extremely difficult as a matter of conflict of interest not to decide in favor of those who supported their election. And I think that is really a big blow on what we would like to have an independent and impartial judiciary. This is why judicial selection, direct popular election of judges, is not mandated, but it's definitely discouraged by most international instruments and by most comparative experience on that issue.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. I know I promised I was going to come to you right away, but I just want to bring in Richard. Those negative experiences that Alejandro just spoke about in Bolivia and some of the overall comments, have they manifested themselves in the state elections in the U.S.? The quality of the judiciary or capture by private interest, illicit interests or otherwise, has that shown itself to be the case in the United States and in some of those states?
I think it's been the minority of cases because, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's true there are elections for some state judges, but they're not always partisan elections. Most elections, in fact, are nonpartisan elections for judges. And I also want to make one distinction. Imagine we're creating a judicial selection mechanism. One possibility is to give exclusive appointment power to one body, one actor. Another option is to share that responsibility, right? And in most cases in the United States, it's a shared responsibility. Think of the federal judges here. The president nominates. The Senate must confirm. That's a shared power of judicial selection. At the state level, sometimes the governor will appoint someone to join the bench, but then in order for her to be renewed in her term, she must face the people in a retention election where she stands for election, not against anyone else, but on her own record. And so there are a number of variations in how elections can be run for judges, just in general, but the United States shows you many different ways that elections can be had. Just one more point, if I could, Ken. A very interesting natural experiment is developing across North America, where if this reform does go through, it appears that it will. I can't think of one amendment in the history of the 1917 Constitution of Mexico that was sent to the states that was not in the end ratified. And so it's likely going to be the case that this reform will succeed, in which case the judges will be elected. In the United States, you have a hybrid system where there is this system of partisan election and nonpartisan election, and also executive appointment with legislative ratification. And then more north in Canada, you have a system where both provincial judges and federal national judges are appointed in a very interesting way. So in theory, the prime minister could appoint all federal judges without consulting anyone. But what's happened through the evolution of constitutional politics in Canadian history is that the prime minister has chosen to share that authority with a third party, an independent body of experts who advise the prime minister on whom to nominate. And so over the years, if this reform does go through in Mexico, we'll have this natural experiment right there for scholars to study. How is the administration of justice? How does it compare when it's executed at the hands of elected judges versus judges in the US at the state and federal level who are partially elected partisanly, nonpartisanly, and then at the national level by appointment, and then in Canada with what is regarded as a merit-based appointment system. So it's all very, very fascinating, Ken and others.
Thank you very much, Richard.
If I may, can I do one comment on that point?
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting to draw from the experience of federal systems like Canada and the United States, where you have a laboratory of experiments, as Richard pointed out, of different ways, and show you that there is not one way, it's different ways of actually dealing with the issue of selection of judges. But I just want to notice one point. Very much that experimental procedure very much depends again, on the political history and culture of each jurisdiction in particular. In the case particular of Mexico, they would have to, of course, consult their own history, and their own history has been one more of a centralized government rather than one of the distribution of powers. I would just heard that these reforms on the federal judiciary, Julie just pointed out, that it's expected that the local judiciaries in Mexico of the several states will follow through. Now, it's interesting. If I would see that Veracruz or Sonora happens to having their own experiment with the appointment of judges,
We lost your sound, Alejandro.
I'm
Now you're on
concerned that
again.
we would not have the opportunity in Mexico of the states having the different systems than the one of the federal system, because the states are likely to follow the imprint of the federal changes. That's why I think each country and a comparative perspective has to be taken, considering the regional and jurisdictional history and culture.
Thank you, Alejandro. Andrea, yeah, I'll come back to you, Julia. Andrea, but I think Richard, one of the amongst the many wonderful points and interesting points you made, I think one of the salient ones we can all agree on in this panel is the world needs more Canada, right? I think we can all agree on that. Andrea, you've been listening very, very patiently to all this, and a lot has been said. We are now talking specifically about the election of judges. So perhaps you could give your view on how you think that actually would play out in Mexico, given what Alejandro was talking about, the political culture, the history. It's one thing to have a system like that in one country, maybe quite different in another state, however it works. Please let us know what you think about that provision.
Sure, thank you very much. So there are several concerns in academia regarding the election of all judges. So it's important to note that it's not only the Supreme Court, but it's also all federal judges and local judges. So we are talking about the whole judiciary. The first one is one that has already been mentioned both by Alejandro and by Richard, that is independence. So it's very clear that, I mean, it's very evident that that they decided to put every 6 years the election and to make it coincide with the presidential election, because it's very well documented in political science that this creates so that the people in the moment of the election of the president and his or her party would have a large support. The problem with there was this idea of whether you could have partisan or not partisan. There is a lot of empirical research, even in the US, by political scientists, that shows, for instance, Herbert Kisser, that show that even with non-partisan elections, once you have a very polarized context, as in the US and in Mexico, the elections polarize and make the judiciaries and make them partisan. If your career depends on being elected, then your judgments, your independence is going to be put into, like, you're going to have less capacity to be independent. This has been very well documented. It was one of the main concerns of the special rapporteur, and this central concern has not been addressed because it's directly linked to the elections. And even Arturo Saldívar in February was argued against elections precisely in this sense. So the election puts into question independence. Second, and very important, this reform it creates a lot of concern because it only requires licenciatura, that is a BA in law. What that means, in Mexico, we have a huge problem of legal education. There are more than 1,200 schools of law. In comparison, in the US, we only have in the US, you only have 250. In Mexico, you can get a law degree with 2 years even. So there is a lot of disparity, 2 or 3 years. There are a lot of schools that give you this law degree. And so the problem with such the problem of legal education in Mexico is great, and if you only ask for that to be a judge or and to be part of the judiciary, then there is the problem of the capacity. In Mexico, there has been a lot of investment in the capacitation of judges and magistrates. The numbers, most of the members of the judiciary have masters or in judges and magistrates in the federal system have graduate education, and the career starts very early on. What will happen when you and the Mexican system is extremely complex. We have like several levels of 3 levels of federal, like the federal system is extremely complex, the legal system is extremely complex, and if you don't have the capacity, the legal capacity to solve it and to create certainty, then these will this would create a huge problem in the sense of not having legal certainty all over the country. And last but not least, it creates a lot of concern regarding corruption. The problem of corruption is to be expected because people will have like the support judges and magistrates have now as part of institution create a lot of surveillance, contrary to what Julie said. And now the elections, the capacity to meddle with elections in Mexico is extremely well documented. So, for instance, organized crime has been meddling with elections in the local level. There's a lot of academic research on that, and the possibility of direct involvement on not only crime, but also the other interest groups is very, very large. So we have a reform in summary that creates problems for independence, creates problem for capacity of the state, professionalization of the decisions, certainty for the people, and justice, and equal protection of justice. So in general, it's thought that that this will not democratize, as is said, but it will create a larger problem. And to close, there is an alternative reform, and we don't need the justices to say that. Or we all know, and there have been in academia, we all know the kind of reform that is needed to really democratize the judicial system, and that is to open access. The most important problem of justice in Mexico regarding the judiciary is the lack of access. It's really hard to access constitutional justice in Mexico, and that is has been said is not lack of proposals. There are a lot of proposals. I mean, there have been a lot of discussion on this, and so I would end up saying that a lot of people in academia think that this is an unfortunate proposal that will not be the correct means for the ends that are supposed to be looking for. And it's not only that it is not the best, it's really bad. I mean, Julie said, well, it's not the best. Well, not only is not the best, it's actually a reform that will have very bad consequences and will be very bad for the government itself. So it's, in a way, is a proposal that is not needed because the government already had the capacity to block and the unconstitutional judgments by having a supermajority in the court, and it's going to have effects, political effects, social effects, and economic effects. So that will be it.
Thanks, Sophie. Julie, I'm just going to wait because I want Sophia to come in and then you'll have an opportunity to respond to everything that you've heard, including Sophia. Sophia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ken. Well, I'd like to be brief, but very affirmative, like very positive in what I'm saying, because I believe this reform will only enact political control because it has this part of discipline, which will be part of a weapon that will take control over the judiciary system included within the reform. And this means that this particular group of justices that will be part of the reform will be not necessarily be responding to any other person, but to the people who actually did the lists out of which they will be elected, which means having this set of judiciary discipline will not only be complicated within the enforcement within the judiciary, but also be political control of the party in power. I agree that there is a mandate, a popular mandate to do something about the judiciary because people actually voted in part for that kind of reform, but not in those terms. And I am very aware that just half of the people know in Mexico that this is something that is happening at the moment, and people don't feel that this will affect them themselves in their daily basis. But I am very aware that this will have economic repercussions, not only in the short, but also in the long term. This is how I started my conversation with the panel, because of course, what is happening right now is we are seeing a constitutional crisis in the making. There was no necessity of having this economic contraction that is also fed in part by the whole sense of uncertainty. Of course, justice uncertainty, but also investment uncertainty. And this will end up affecting growth, and growth will be affecting, of course, the quality of employment and fiscal health. And this also will be affecting prosperity. The government that is coming has been talking about having shared prosperity, and this will not be able to, they will not be able to deliver if we don't have growth, and growth won't be there if there is no certainty for investments, and investments are right now holding back because we are not sure what is coming next. This on the economic side. But on the political and in the broader arena, I believe elections, we know, won't solve impunity and won't have the governance reform that actually such a judiciary as we have now need, because we are very much aware that the problem of impunity doesn't just start at the judiciary. It starts at the police people, at the capabilities of the investigative agencies at the local level. And then in the investigation, how everything is put together so that there are proofs to be judged around and not only saying of the people. So if we want justice for the broader group of people that are not being able to get into just trials and so on, we need to start somewhere else and not at the top of the problem, which be the federal level of the justice. So elections won't make impunity better. It will cost a lot of money because we are talking about an election that is 7 times bigger at the federal level that as the one we had last year. Of course, last year we also had local elections, but if we only talk about the federal elections we had last year, this will be at least 7 times bigger. There are a lot of logistical problems, of course, and it will be complicated to just, organize the elections. But we also know that right now, and for the last 20 or 30 years, we have been seeing a growing participation of organized crime within the elections. I am not proud of it. I am very aware this is something that is a profound wound in our electoral system. But I believe this is pretty much what Ken Salazar tried to say for the last 2 or 3 weeks by now. We have factual powers, not only criminal organized crime or criminal organizations, but also, like economic actors or political and parties actors that might be, very involved in the election process. So therefore, we're losing independency because the spirit of a liberal economy is to have, antitrust, but also have better circumstances for the customers and for the businesses to thrive. And what we're seeing with this reform is we won't be having those independent judges, and therefore we won't be having a possibility of having better conditions of production and, of course, of consumers to have to pay less for the same products in a better quality. And part of the loss of the independency is actually that the lists out of where the people are going to be elected or supposed to be elected won't be lists out of, the best judges or the best lawyers in the country. They will be made by partisan people within the presidency, the president herself, but also within the Congress. And this is problematic because, as we may have seen, we have the supermajority of a party, but within the party, of course, there are currents, and we won't know who's going to be more powerful and who's going to do the list. What we know is we have a party that is very vertical. They do what the leader says. And this is how what we saw last week and this week within the voting for the bill. And I want to say last in this comment that this is not a feminist reform at all. I mean, I won't discuss the numbers of whether Saldívar did or did not for women. What I actually know is that there is not only a way to be a female lawyer in the world. And I am very sure that the women that already reached the position of justices or judges and so on, they had to come along a longer period of preparation for themselves, but also there was a structure that was being that had led that their position was taken by a female. If we start all over again, we will be taking out all the career of those women who have been making the path for a generation of women that were coming along. And we will start, focusing on some of the eligible qualities of the people that usually don't have a gender vision or a female vision on the position. So therefore, this is everything but feminist. And I believe this is something I needed to address. So thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Sophia, very much. Julie, thank you for your patience and listening. I like you, there are a number of things I'm sure you want to comment on, but if I could, and want to hear all of that, but I want to just start off with a question, which is, on one hand, we were looking at the changes. We're hearing some of the problem, or some of the concerns being expressed is, yes, there are problems with the judiciary, but these reforms don't address it. And some people said it actually aggravates other aspects of it. And at the same time, we're hearing that, and then Andrea alluded to a number of studies that have been done by Mexican jurists. We know from Alejandro and Richard that there's a wealth of experience outside of Mexico in addressing these issues. And it's not clear to me yet that what has informed the Mexican government in coming up with this reform, how much of those studies that Andrea talked about, or that Richard, the experiences and studies that Alejandro have talked about, have been taken into consideration from a juridical point of view, a system point of view, as opposed to what the accusation is of being a political point of view. And I guess the one example of that, if we want to use one, is something that Andrea had mentioned. I think I heard her say that, was Arturo Saldívar not very long ago himself said he wasn't for the election of judges. And so now apparently he, well, not more apparently, he is. And so the question is, what I know you may not know specifically what in his mind, but in general, what would he have informed him from a juridical delivery of justice point of view to change his point of view on that? Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, what's behind the, what has informed the government in making these decisions, given the wealth of information that's been produced in Mexico and elsewhere in the world?
Okay, yeah, I can start by answering your question, and then I would like to address as many of the points that were made as
The
possible.
floor is yours.
Thank you very much. In terms of what motivates this, first, I think that you have to put this in the context of a president and political party that believes in giving the power to the people. So that is part of what's at the core of this proposal. And the concerns that have been set forth by civil society, by academia, and looking at comparative perspectives, those concerns have been addressed in many of the details of the reform. As in anything, the devil is in the details, and that's what I want to get to now, because I feel like a lot gets lost. First, I want to mention that there's no international standard mandating a specific form of selection of judges. There is no international prescription that says this is the way that judges must be elected. In fact, Principle 12 of the Basic Principles on the Independence of the Judiciary expressly mentions elected judges. So I just want to make that clear. Second, I want to make clear that the proposed reform for the selection of the judiciary through popular vote does not expand, but instead reduces Morena's power, the political party's power, to appoint members of the judiciary. Why? Because the president is relinquishing, well, the next president, Claudia Sheinbaum, relinquishing her power to nominate Supreme Court justices, despite only needing the approval of a Senate where she holds a supermajority. If the Senate fails, currently under the current system, if the Senate fails to come to an agreement, she can unilaterally decide who gets on the Supreme Court. And what the proposal does, as far as the Supreme Court, is proposes the participation of all three branches of government, and with the participation of all three branches of government, including the judiciary, those candidates will be submitted to a popular vote. In terms of whether or not the candidates will be qualified, that's why there's an evaluation committee that each one of the branches of government should have in order to ensure that the candidates it puts forth comply with have the technical capacity in order to do the job at hand. And the reform requires
Julian, can I
Yeah.
interrupt just for 1 second? Fair enough, and I want you to continue. But what we heard today, that in certain cases, or many cases, just having a law degree is enough to qualify to be a judge. Is that?
That's not the case. You need at least 5 years of work experience under the modifications proposed by the committee in the Chamber of Deputies. That was a change that was done, which is something that I wanted to mention. Also, the fact that judges in Mexico generally do not write their own judgments. They have permanent law clerks. Unlike in the United States, where the clerks of the Supreme Court rotate every couple of years, here they're law clerks, and the judicial career in those terms will still be under the administration of there's an administrative body that will oversee the judicial career. There will also be a national school for judges that there's currently a school, and they would be transformed to make it national. And so there will be lots of clerks with lots of training behind these judges, also ensuring that there are quality judgments made. Also, I wanted to mention that the proposal establishes strict rules governing the election of judges. Not only will they be nonpartisan, but public and private campaign financing is strictly prohibited for all elected positions, as is the use of radio and television spots. You can't buy television spots. Political parties cannot endorse anybody, cannot proselytize in favor or against of any candidacy. And these are safeguards looking at other experiences to try to ensure that in Mexico, we don't have those same problems, and that candidates are chosen based on their academic background, their professional experience, their judicial philosophy, and perhaps their legal precedents rather than on any campaign promises. How will people get to know them? Well, the National Electoral Institute should have, there's in the proposal, public debates organized by the institution. And to ensure gender parity, I respectfully disagree with Sofía. It is mandated that an equal number of female and male candidates be nominated for each position. And after the elections, the National Electoral Institute will alternate the allocation of positions between men and women to the candidates with the most votes. This measure ensures gender parity in the judiciary at once. And in terms of the experiences of Bolivia and the USA, so the point is, oh, the experience in Bolivia was not positive. One of the reasons for having the timing of the elections be in conjunction with federal elections is so that we don't have the problem that I understand in Bolivia is the case, that there is very little voter turnout and a lot of voter apathy. And in the United States, well, the Supreme Court, well, I would argue that the current system where in Mexico, there is basically the executive has a lot of power to put justices on the Supreme Court. And in the US, where the executive nominates and the Senate confirms, those experiences haven't been positive either. We currently have the most politicized court in Mexico in recent memory, and in the United States, where the United States Supreme Court has rolled back the rights of women, sexual reproductive rights, has allowed a lot of money in politics. Basically, corporations have a freedom of expression and freedom to have a strong influence in basically in elections in the United States. And then when we talk about, oh, there's a lot of assumptions that this system will necessarily lead to a greater lack of independence. But I would say, from whom? Right now, I don't know that we can say that we have an independent Supreme Court. And in terms of like, especially sort of this idea that because the country is polarized, there will be a lack of independence. I don't know that I necessarily agree that there's polarization when 59% of the populace voted for this and wants this. Judges make law, and they do so based on their judicial philosophy. So I don't see why allowing the people to decide both the persons and the ideologies of the persons who will decide upon their cases is a bad thing. That's why I say independence from whom? From the people, from what they perceive, what their judicial philosophy that they want. I'm not sure that I understand this. And in terms of whether or not this addresses all of the problems in the judiciary, well, no, but further reforms are coming. This is one step, the first step, but many other reforms need to happen, and those are, there are several proposals in that direction. In terms of the reactions of the markets, I think reaction to change is normal. Anytime there's a big change, of course there's fear, and of course people and interests that benefit from the current system, of course they're not going to want to give up those privileges or even fears, because the unknown creates fears. So I don't think that that's something that is unexpected. Anytime there is a big change, there will be reactions and there will be fears from the markets. I also think that where there's money to be made, people will invest. there are unfortunately several countries around the world that that their human rights records are highly questionable and people invest. I don't think that the markets are necessarily concerned with, I mean, as long as they have a system that is clear and that they know what the rules of the game are, they will invest. And the rules of this system are clear, and they will know what the playing field looks like. I think that a lot of the critiques are either assumptions on what will happen that don't necessarily go to the details of what the reform proposes. And if you look at the reform in the details, a lot of these concerns are addressed.
Thank you very much.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead. We're at time, beyond time, but if everybody will indulge us on the panel for a few more minutes, I definitely want to go around to get everybody to have last comments based on what he or she has listened to. So I want to start that in a second, but Julie, just in a just to go back to my original question, or maybe if you have a short answer, is what in the promulgation of this reform proposal, what references are you aware of what the framers of this proposal looked at to guide them in best practices to solve the problems they wanted to solve? Did they look at these other studies? Did they look at international experiences? Are you aware of that?
Well, I wasn't involved in that,
Right.
so
That's
I mean, I
I
can't
want
tell
it to
you
be an unfair
exactly who
question.
did. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
but it's not an unfair question, because I can tell you that there were dialogues, public dialogues, open to anybody, both before and after the elections of Claudia Sheinbaum. So in order to receive information from all sectors of society, including academia, including comparative experiences, in order to inform the proposals. So even though I wasn't involved in it, and I can't tell you specifically what was in front of the lawyers writing the text, I can tell you that there were democratic exercises and there were academic exercises intended to receive information from all sides. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Last round of comments. Again, thanks everybody. I really wanted to hear more people, everybody talk a lot more, but there's only a certain amount of time that we have. And the fear always was that even an hour and 15 minutes wasn't enough. And we may go an hour and a half. It clearly is not even close to enough. But I guess for this last round, maybe Richard, I'll start with you. Comments on things that you've heard, other points that you may want to raise in closing.
Yeah, just maybe three short points. First, I want to congratulate Julie on the effectiveness of not only just the descriptive analysis that Julie has given to what the reform entails, but really the very helpful defense and justification for why the reform is thought to be needed at this time. And Julie's been quite brave under fire the past 60 minutes from at least three of us. And so I want to congratulate Julie on that. Second point is a comparative point, which is that in many countries around the world historically, when judicial independence has been targeted by political actors, which is not to say that judges are not political actors, because they are, but when judges have been targeted by, let's call them the elected branches, judges have resorted often to a device that is not available to judges in Mexico, because judges in Mexico have said they don't want to exercise the power. What is that device? It's the power to invalidate a constitutional reform. And so here I'm thinking of cases in India, in Belize, in Colombia, many countries around the world where elected branches have sought to pinch down on the power of courts, on their independence. Those judiciaries have said, no, we're going to invalidate that constitutional reform. It's an unconstitutional amendment. The Mexican Supreme Court has not given itself that power, in fact, has chosen not to assert that power. And so if it were the case that the Supreme Court today, the justices today, were resistant to this reform, that is a weapon that they don't have in their arsenal because they chose not to give themselves that weapon. Third and final point, I think, again, is comparative. But it has to do more with my own personal view of this reform proposal. I was invited to the Supreme Court of Mexico a couple of times to make some remarks, not about this, but about other things. But one time I went, I gave a lecture on the use of comparative law in domestic constitutional adjudication. And the takeaway from my lecture at the Supreme Court of Mexico was that it's very useful to look abroad, to learn about what other countries, whether they're similarly situated or not, what other countries are doing when faced with similar challenges. Useful to look abroad, but no one should feel compelled to do what other countries are doing because they are doing it. Every answer must be arrived at with attention to local norms, local values, local needs, and local histories. And so it may well be that this reform, which is supported, if we count the election, the most recent election, supported by a majority of Mexicans, it may well be that it's the right model for the moment. And so I think we have to be open to seeing how this goes, because my own view is that it's inevitably going to be enacted because of the dynamics of constitutional reform in Mexico. And my sense from hearing Julie and from my own independent readings is that efforts have been made to respond as best as the political parties could to the concerns that have been echoed. Now, there will be enduring concerns, but hopefully the idea is that a responsive, responsible government will continue to be responsive to concerns echoed about the proposal when it is enacted. And that's democracy, right? We talked earlier about democracy. Is it just majority rule? Well, maybe, but it's also about responsiveness to the needs of the people as they're expressed at that time. And those needs may change. My last comment, Ken, is to you and the council. Thank you for bringing us together. This has been a fascinating conversation. I've been really happy to be involved.
Oh, thank you very much, Richard. Your contributions have been superb. So thank you. Alejandro, final thoughts.
Ken, definitely. And my final thoughts would be also in along comparative lines. I think the conversation and this dialogue have been enriched precisely because we've been talking about different assumptions, as Julie put it, about what the effects of this reform could be. And I think that point has to be taken from the standpoint that from one point of departure, independence it cannot be measured in absolute terms. Countries are or are not independent should be shifted to the question, some countries are more independent than others, and it depends on what. And that is when the issue comes up to the question of Mexico. What is best for Mexico? And Richard have been very diplomatic in opening up and saying we should be open and look at very different views. And I agree with him that we should, and I'm sure the Mexican legislature have considered it. And I'm glad that they haven't taken the path of actually trying to attempt to pass judgment on the constitutionality of the constitutional amendment, which some jurisdictions, as Richard pointed out, have taken. I think that would have been, as the former Supreme Court of Justice of Venezuela said at the time when the Supreme Court attempted to go into that issue on the Chavez constitution, that would be political suicide for the Supreme Court of Mexico if they would try to pass judgment on the constitutional amendment that 59 that this very powerful Congress have taken. So I think that the end of the point would be comparative experiences are very helpful. I think we are assuming that this is going to strengthen the independence and the effectiveness of the Mexican judiciary. I personally am not as optimistic as Julie is about that, but again, I don't have any scientific proof to tell her that that be the case, and I wish Mexico the best in this new experience. From the past experience, and especially from the last administration, which in the 6 years of the term has not been very happy with decisions of the Supreme Court and have criticized the members of the Supreme Court in the way they have criticized it, I'm afraid that the future of the judiciary in Mexico may be more imperiled than strengthened by these reforms. But again, I'm open to new views, and thank you very much, Ken, for giving us the opportunity to have different views on the same subject.
Thank you very much again, Alejandro. Wonderful. Sofía, couple-
One last round. Thank you. Well, I would like to recall the case of Albania. Albania is one of those countries that would like to be added to the European Union. And several years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, they had this great idea of vetting all the judges because they also had a big problem of corruption within the judiciary branch in the country. So therefore, they've been putting away the deadline to do so. They've been losing a lot of cases from former judges in front of the human rights, what's it called, trials in front of the EU, the European Union, because they are trying to, of course, address the issue that not only by being vetted against corruption, they're going to be better judges or justices. The thing is, Albania had the help of the European Union within doing so, and they haven't been able to do or to complete the task. So they've been doing this for about 8 years or 7 years, and they have been pushing the deadline to the front, because it's not easy. But Albania has less than 3 million people inhabitants, and Mexico has 130 inhabitants. So I believe this is a different type of problem we're facing here. I'm not saying again that the judiciary branch doesn't need a lot of adjustments regarding, I insist, in governance, in making better doing better in helping or making not affordable but available justice for everybody. And I think just the way it is being done is not the proper way it should be done, because this is such a big issue that shouldn't be done in a rush, just because in the last month of the current administration, we happen to have a big supermajority within the Congress. I believe this is something that should have been discussed for at least a period of sessions, which is 6 months, and being heard. Justices across the country should have been heard, not only by the judiciary branch within their forums, but also, by all the people, including the Congress. And I am very aware that the majority is a combination of support for the president who's already leaving, but it's also a very much hope, and it is it is a confidence, or it is a vote for the coming president, Claudia Sheinbaum. And I am not very sure that the supermajority that is being conformed in the Congress can only be addressed to the president who's leaving and not to the president who's coming. So I am very unhappy in the way that this is proceeding in the last month of the previous administration and not being discussed during the new presidential term, because even though I am aware that there are 2 different powers, the judiciary, 3, the judiciary, the Congress, and of course the president, the executive branch, I believe this is something that should have been discussed with more time. And last, I would like to say that Richard mentioned the responsiveness to the necessities and to the priorities of minorities or vulnerable groups. It's also democracy. And I believe this is exactly what hasn't been heard, because we haven't been including a lot of the demands of the people at the local level, and haven't been including it in the discussion of this particular reform. And I am, again, very aware that also this is making a lot of noise around investments in such a world in which we need to increase the confidence within the region, not lower it. So these are my 2 cents. And thank you very much, Ken, for the invitation.
Ken,
No.
can I just take 10 seconds, just
Please.
10 short seconds, because
Please.
Sofía mentioned Albania. I was involved in advising on that constitutional reform in 2015, 2016. And I think it proves the point, which is that they had an aspirational goal, and now they're working it and reworking it and refining it to achieve its objectives. And so that's the point of being responsive to popular will after reform is made, and Albania is proving that point.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you again, Sophia. Julie, I think I gave you the first word. I'm going to give Andrea the last word, but if there's, and I know you spoke extensively before this last round, but if there's anything else you want to say quickly, I'll give you the floor now before I give it to Andrea to close us.
Well, two things. I guess I would just want to perhaps respond to something Sophia said. And this proposal was rolled out in February, so it has not been something done within the last month. And I mean, the current president has the power to implement his agenda. There's no reason why he should sit on his hands during the last month of his administration, when he has he has both the political will, and popular mandate in order to do something. There's really, and also Claudia Sheinbaum, the next president, is on board with these reforms. So it's not that this hasn't been something that just popped out during the last month. And there's really no reason why President Andrés Manuel López Obrador should consider himself now a lame duck when he has the power to implement this popular mandate. And also, I guess I wanted to just close with saying that, I guess reiterating the point that judges, through their interpretations of the law, they make law. And they do so based on their experiences, their lived experiences, their judicial philosophy, their preconceived notions on how the law should be interpreted and applied. And I believe that it aligns with democratic values that people choose the ideologies and the judicial philosophies that will guide the decisions that impact their lives. I would just close with that, and also thank Ken and thank all of the panelists for their respectful point of views, for this dialogue and exchange. I think it was very enriching to hear all of you. So thank you to all.
And thank you for your comments as well. Superb. Andrea, you have the final words.
Thank you very much. Well, first, thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you, Ken, to convene this dialogue. I would like to say that two little points, touch on two things that Julie said regarding saying that this reform actually creates less power to the president, to the elected president, Dr. Sheinbaum. I think this is not really the case, because with this reform, all the people that are in the judiciary now would will leave and lose their power, their positions, and their posts. And new elected people will come. So we will have 1,600 judges, and this would create a transformation on the whole judiciary. So it's Julie was only pointing to saying, well, the president is actually losing power to appoint the judges, but what will happen with this is that the whole judiciary is going to be transformed, is going to be elected, and those people that were there after years and years of career will lose their positions, and if they want to be part of the judiciary, would need to go through elections. So actually, and as she was pointing to, and is completely correct, the president party has now the numbers in both chambers, well, in Congress, to actually push for the candidates. So in a way, this is she was only focusing on one little point, and on the whole, the party Morena would get much more power than it would have now. 2/3 of the judiciary now have been appointed after 1995, that by merit examinations, and all these people would lose their positions. And so you will the reform actually gives more power, no less. Regarding the mandate, I think it's very important to know, and we all know because we are all part of them. We have lived in democracies, that we have only one vote to express a lot of things. So I think it's a lot of people voted for Morena for very many different reasons, and it's not completely true that this position is that everyone who voted for Morena agrees necessarily and knows this reform, and that point I think it's important. Regarding how much we as academics and as civil society have been heard, I think there has been a lot of dialogues, but unfortunately these dialogues have not been taking really into consideration. There is a feeling that in the core of the reform has not changed after so many dialogues. And finally, something that I also want to point to is that these committees that are going to evaluate, I mean, I want you to think about what it means to evaluate the numbers of what the people of what we are talking about a lot of positions, and what are the mechanisms of this selection, and of the selection of the capacities of who is going to become judges. This is a Herculean task. There are no these committees are only mentioned. There are no clear formal requirements. 5 years of experience is 5 years after the BA in whatever experience. It's not real experience. I just want to give you a little bit a sense of the kind of experience you get through the career in the judiciary. You have 3 years as official judiciary. Most of the secretaries are 11 years there, and then they go to become 6 years judges, and then 12 years magistrate. These are the numbers. So if you think about a magistrate is there after many after like 2 decades of the career. And the idea that the secretaries are that these very good secretaries are going to be there to do the hard work of the elected people, like politicians that are going to be actually elected to be judges has a problem. That is that I do agree that secretaries are extremely important in Mexico. Clerks, we call them secretaries, but clerks are very good because they are part of the judicial career, and this is what exactly is going to be destroyed. So the capacity, the secretaries, it's kind of weird to say, oh, don't worry, we will have clerks, when clerks are part of the very career that will no longer exist. So anyway, I think I in the spirit of Richard, I always love to hear Richard because he's always so kind and nice. In exactly that experience, I also wish, of course, Mexico the very best. I really hope that this reform that I agree will most probably pass will be a good reform, and I really hope that we will that the next government will be open to dialogue and to the changes, the institutional changes that are needed on the way, if there are needed. So I really am glad to have been here, and I do express the concern most people in academia have, and now I really can say that for me it's impressive. People from all ideological backgrounds are extremely concerned in academia for this reform. So thank you very much, and thank you, Julie, for the difficult task. Sofía, thank you, Richard, Alejandro, and of course, Ken and Sandra, who has been very nicely making the translation.
Thank you very much, all of you. And thank you again for your indulgence. I know we've gone way over time, and we've hit some important issues, and there are others to be hit on. Maybe we will follow up in the series and doing more of this when we see how things develop. As I said at the beginning, the video of this event will be available this afternoon or tomorrow morning at the latest at our website, ccacanada.com. We invite you to look at it, download it, do whatever you want to do with it, to disseminate it to all those whom you want to disseminate it. With that, it's echoing what everybody said. We do wish Mexico the best. We always have. Thank you for all thank you for listeners for staying with us through all this entire time. Thank you again to the panelists. Superb presentations. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.